It's I had a pretty regular childhood, I would say. Just grew up, lived down kind of off of Lakeshore, and my two parents. I have one sister, and so I had a fairly normal upbringing. Went to normal public school, and never really had any sort of religious background. Though my parents were more agnostic, or maybe close to atheism, but not quite. So I didn't really have much experience with in faith or in religion in any way.
Now, when did you begin searching for the meaning to life? You said you really didn't have a religious background.
Yeah.
Does that mean you don't ask questions? Does that mean you don't ask, why am I here? What's going on? How was it?
Well, yeah, I think like everyone asks those questions. They're big questions, and I think for me, my experience sort of happened. I actually can remember a few times as a young sort of a kid or whatever, where I'm sure some of you out there too. If you look up at the sky and you see all these like the stars, and you kind of wonder like, how did that happen? And just there's something about some of the more like evolutionary non-creator type of explanations that for me just were really difficult. It was really difficult to accept that this was was all chance. And so I would say even from a really young age, I was curious about creation. And there's the whole thing about, well, who created, someone had to have created that, because if that, there has to be an original something that started it all. And so I remember I was in Cubs, like Boy Scouts and there's Cubs and stuff. And I remember being on a camping trip actually one time with a friend of mine. We were just sitting in the tent and we're just like, as 8-year-olds talking about this. And I remember even experiences where I used to go, me and my friend, I had a friend who lived on my street, and we were really into rollerblading and stuff. And every once in a while, I just got this urge that I just wanted to go inside. This is 100% true. I'm not making this up. I just had this. There's a United Church near where we lived, and I just had this urge that I wanted to go in and sit in the pew and just pray. I don't know why. So I would say something kind of was being stirred in me, even from a young age. But those experiences weren't certainly anything that stuck with me, and I, of course, got into all kinds of trouble in my teenage years. I went to a few conferences that talked about the different religions, and I began to study it. I got a bunch of CD series and started to listen to different sermons, and I started to read books. And I came to find that actually, amazingly, there was sufficient answers to a lot of my questions, which I wasn't expecting at all, actually. I was expecting kind of, I imagined Christianity as being a small wooden shack, and one swing of my hammer and down it'll come. And quickly found out that it's really more like a golden, indestructible tower that I really had a hard time finding fault with, actually. And I tried, I really did. And so that wasn't quite enough for me to get to the point where I could believe it, though. I got to the point, though, where I could say, wow, this is quite incredible. I mean, Christianity, the Bible, the person of Jesus, what the claims of Christianity are, that could actually be true. But I said also, it could not be true. I mean, it's either or. It could be either or. So it wasn't enough, like studying those things and getting the answers to those questions actually wasn't enough for me to have faith in the person of Jesus. What it was, Shauna actually, as you see her later on, she's going to be singing with the Penny Merchants. She invited me to come and see her sing, and she was really good friends with the guys in the band, and they have a really close relationship. They're great friends, and so she really wanted me to meet them. And anyway, they were singing in Niagara Falls one night, and so they invited me to go. It was a youth conference. And so I went out to see the band play, and it was a little bit weird to me. There was a lot of songs with the word Jesus in it, which is a little unusual for me. And it was a little bit bizarre. It was a youth conference too, so I was definitely the older one there, and there's a lot of younger kids there. And anyway, what happened was after the songs, there was a speaker who came out, and I can't remember the guy's name, unfortunately, but he was an ex-football player for the Miami Dolphins. And he had an experience with the Lord and had become a Christian. And so he presented the message of the gospel, the truth of the gospel, which is that Jesus Christ, who is God's only begotten Son, was sent to this earth and that became obedient to death on a cross in order to make atonement for the sins of us in the world. And that by his death, we are now justified before God, that we are now, our relationship with God the Father is restored through Jesus. And that's the first part of the message of the gospel. The second part is that through the cross, if you have a Bible at home, I'd encourage you to read Isaiah 53 or 1 Peter 2:24. It just talks about the healing side and the restoration side of the cross. And so he began to speak a little bit about that by Jesus' death on the cross, that we actually go through restoration, and there's healing that takes place, and God takes us out of our brokenness, out of our broken lives, and he brings healing and restoration. And so he shared a testimony, the guy who was speaking. So, I was kind of listening, and I thought it was like, well, it's kind of interesting, I guess, a little bit. And anyway, the guy, he said, I want you to think, he said this to us who were in the crowd, he said, I want you to think of something that's happened to you in your life because the world is a broken place, because it's, because there is sin. And when I was in grade 11 in high school, a friend of mine actually committed suicide, which is a difficult thing, as I'm sure a lot of you know, to have a friend go through something like that. And so anyway, I thought of that. I thought, well, I'll go along with this guy, see where this goes, kind of thing. And then he said something. He said, I want you to close your eyes and picture Jesus. And I'll describe as best as I can to you what happened, but I closed my eyes and I entered into an extremely vivid vision of Jesus, where Jesus was standing in front of me. We were in a park setting. There was 2 gravel paths that intersected, and Jesus and I were standing in the intersection, and he was looking at me and I was looking at him. And one thing I remember about Jesus, to describe him to you, he was actually about up to my shoulders in height, and he was wearing clothes that were ripped and torn, and he was covered in dirt and blood. And I remember he was really thin as well. Like, you could see his cheekbones and his rib cage, and his arms were extremely thin. They were looked like skin and bones, and it looked like patches of his hair had been pulled out, and his blood dripping down, and he was just a total mess. And I remember being like really astonished at how Jesus chose to kind of appear before me. So I just really felt God was teaching me something I never knew about Jesus. I'd never read Isaiah 53 and the concept of the suffering servant. It was a new thing to me. Anyway, so I'm looking at this Jesus, and as I'm seeing this vision, I hear the speaker, and he says, okay, I want you to take that thing that you thought of before, and I want you to give it to Jesus. And so I remembered, actually, I reached into where my heart was, and I pulled out a stone tablet. And on the tablet, there was this inscription, and there was this black vapor surrounding it. It was just heavy, and I just knew I had to get rid of it. And I ended up handing it to Jesus. And Jesus took it, and he pushed it inside of where his heart was. And a really profound thing happened when he did that. I felt what I would describe as a cosmic vacuum cleaner, sucking all of the sin and the anger, the sorrow, the confusion, all those things that were the whole package of that, just vacuumed off of me, and he endured it on himself. And I remember in that moment, I looked right into his eye. I remember distinctly what his eyes looked like. And I looked right into his eye, and it was just like I knew that in 2 seconds, he had experienced those, however many years it was, 4 years or whatever, 5 years, of that intense grief and pain and the sorrow and just confusion that I'd experienced. He took that and he condensed it into a 2-second period and endured it. And the pain that I saw him endure with that was so astounding. And in fact, I actually began to bawl my eyes out. I couldn't believe this was like supernatural love. There's no such thing as love like this in the world we live in. This is like something else. This is a different dimension of love, and it just struck me to the heart. And at that moment, I knew that Jesus was real. I knew that he was the Son of God, and I knew that he was real, and I knew that he was after me. He was pursuing me. And so I decided at that moment to give my life to him.
Tim, how would you describe what happened when you encountered Jesus that night? Because you did not have a Christian background. You didn't have Christian roots in terms of knowing what would happen next. What began to take place in your life?
Well, actually, interesting. My first reaction was, to be honest, it was I felt like, oh no, I have to become a Christian. I had such a bad, a bad rap with Christians, or what I thought a Christian was, and I remember feeling like, oh no, here I go, I have to now be a Christian because I've encountered Jesus and I know he's real. And so that was a little difficult for me, to be honest. And the nice thing too for me was that as the Lord began to work in my life, one of the things that you'll find with the Lord, as I have, is that he is so gentle, and he's so loving, and he's a true father. That's what you need to know about God, is he is a heavenly father, and he loves you as a son or a daughter. And he began to just teach me and deal with me in that way. And there was things in my life that I was doing that were still dishonoring to God, and were still, you know, sin and stuff, and still causing me separation from Him. But He just slowly, one by one, took those things and began to you know, work on them, and say, hey, you know, Tim, try this, and just, you know, just slowly as I began to walk, what I also found is you start to get closer and closer with the Lord, and then as you get closer, then He shows you more things and brings about more change, and then you come closer. So I would say it was about a year for me of walking with the Lord and going through that process before I was really, my heart was really there following the Lord, you know, following Jesus.
Profound change has taken place in your life.
Yeah, I guess it has, yeah.
When I think, Tim, that really you've only been serving the Lord for 7 years and a couple of months,
Yeah.
and I see what God has done in your life, I think,